we step behind the screen where we discuss running a successful tabletop game. Dan, what have you got for us today?
So, I was talking to some people the other day, and they kind of imparted upon me this startling revelation where actually there are more characters in the game of in an RPG than just the player characters. I'm told they're referred to as non-player characters.
Yes, I've heard of these creatures. They usually
Yeah.
run around in packs. They move in
Yeah.
herds.
Yes, precisely.
You mean
Generally,
they're XP, Dan? They're called XP.
yes. Yeah. I mean, that's what I thought about. But oh yeah, after this startling revelation, I decided to do a little bit of research, have a little dive, and I just thought I'd share with you all how to make your NPCs come to life
By not killing them.
by not killing them. Yeah. But at that point, they can't hand up their XP otherwise.
Yeah.
So
More XP if they have a name.
so arguably NPCs are the most powerful tool in the DM's toolbox with which they can celebrate, influence, manipulate, and crush the player characters with. And NPCs, quite literally, by their nature, come in all sorts of shapes, sizes, flavors, and tastes. And the prospect of having this ever-expanding catalogue of NPCs that your players may or may not interact with on a whim can feel a bit daunting. Especially if you don't want to fall into a situation where you're, in inverted commas, just rehashing farmer number 34 into farmer number 35. Making your NPCs feel unique and real is surprisingly easy. So the first thing that I try to do with my NPCs to help kind of make them memorable is when the players interact with them, I try to give the NPCs one unique thing. Now, this is advice that you can pick up from anywhere. So this one unique thing could be absolutely like a voice, but more specifically, sometimes it'll be a mannerism or some sort of unusual trait or some kind of quirky physical appearance or something along those lines. The NPC that kind of looks around shiftily and rubs their fingers nervously as they talk, who chuckles at the end of their sentences. The shop owner that, for some unbeknownst reason, has draconic eyes. The tavern owner that has a very distinctive laugh. All of these things are simple. They're simple to create a lot of the time, and they're also the things that your players will latch onto and allow them to kind of more quickly kind of remember them. So when we were discussing what to talk about for this segment, I put it to the test, and I just kind of slipped into a voice that
it was very weird.
It was very weird, but Anton immediately recognized it as Gimbal, one of the NPCs from the Cormier Echoes of War campaign.
In like 5 words, I was like, "Oh, Gimbal."
Yeah. Just the voice and the wide eyes and the looking around. Yeah, he knew exactly who it was I was doing, and that's kind of the power of it. Once you've ingrained that, those kind of quirks into your players' memories, those characters will just. They'll start living rent-free in their heads, which is kind of what you want, right?
Do you write this down? Do you write those quirks down before when you're preparing a character?
So if you know that there's an NPC coming up, like I will try to go out of my way to make a note of what their one unique thing is.
Okay.
Yeah. But, there are going to be points where, your players will speak to an NPC that you haven't planned for. So, having like a catalog or, if it comes like a library, it doesn't have to be particularly big, of just things that are unusual. Does your NPC have uncontrollable hiccups? Does your NPC blink a lot? Does all of these? It doesn't have to be anything groundbreaking. It's just some oddity, because we as people, we are all kind of fundamentally odd, right? We're all unique. So if you think something's a bit too strange, don't, because this uniqueness is what makes us all special, and in turn what makes your NPC special.
That's good advice, because when I DM one-shots mostly, I usually just focus on the voice. and
Yes.
I only have a repertoire of like 10 voices. So all my NPCs kind of sound the same after a while because I only have 10 voices, and I
Yeah.
forget to add that little quirk that
Yeah.
they might have that makes them special, I guess.
I think for me, I'm always the quirk, and then the voice comes later. Like I've just been reminded of an NPC that I completely forgot about. But do you remember the Neverwinter campaign? Solomon Galt. He
Yes.
was the and what was the one quirk I gave him? Let's see if you can actually remember that one quirk. And I think it was the thing that most people seem to remember about him.
From memory, he had that kind of slow, ponderous, like almost drawl and the funny eye.
And then the constantly talking to himself.
Yes.
Which is
Yeah,
the thing I was
mumbling.
going for. The fact that obviously he was controlled by an aboleth, but I wanted to put that across but not make it obvious. And it was the thing that he always talked to himself. He'd be mid-conversation and would stop and be like, "What? Well, maybe, possibly. Yes, we could try that." And then come back, and the players be like, "What?"
Wait, what?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, what you were saying, Anton, about having a limited catalog of voices,
Yeah.
that is something that is surprisingly easy to kind of change up and expand. Because there have been points where I found that I felt that my repertoire of voices was limited to the accents, or
Yeah.
effectively, the accents that I could do.
That's what I have. Yeah.
But that's not necessarily the case, because you just need to go to any area in the world where everyone has the same accent, and they will all speak differently. And there's various kind of, I think of them as sliders. There's a YouTube video from the YouTube channel Improve Your Voice, and we'll chuck a link in the description down below. But specifically, the video in question is how to create 100 distinctly different voices. Now, that's a bit of a fib, because by the time we get to the end of the video, we're talking tens of thousands of potential voices that can be created off the back of the lessons that are taught in this YouTube channel. The chap in the video, and this is why I think of it as sliders, effectively starts going through the idea of just changing things like how slow or fast do you talk? Because that inherently starts to create a different voice. How nasally or throaty do you talk? That also changes voice. You compile that with the slow or fast. Now you've got 4 voices. How pushed and direct, or like relaxed and kind of indirect. Like, it's all of these kind of little bits that you can tack on, and just by changing how you present yourself, present your voice, you don't have to put on a different accent, but it will sound like a different person. So yes, the speed, the throat positioning, the directness or indirectness, the age of your voice, the sheer volume of your voice. Effectively, you almost have those listed in your head, and then you think to yourself, if I make this character like old and breathy, well, yes, of course. It doesn't. I can talk in the exact same voice that I normally would, and it would sound very different to if I was talking with a loud and pushed voice in a direct tone. It just kind of comes naturally. You can then layer on your accents and get even more options. And it was watching that video that kind of made me realize, just adding a couple of those onto a voice creates something unique.
So for an NPC, quirk and accent can really sort of define that.
Quirk and voice. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Going on the voice, like as an interesting thing, I know it sounds like a bit of a weird tangent, but have you ever heard the difference between Brian Blessed being Brian Blessed and when he's being quiet? Like how
is it possible for Brian Blessed
yes,
to be quiet?
And to be honest, when he goes quieter, he's quite scary because his entire sort of accent, everything changes. So you've got Brian, you've got Brian Blessed, and then he goes quiet, and then he starts talking softer, and it suddenly puts a lot more into how long his words are, and he becomes menacing. And I really find that when Brian Blessed loses the volume and just slows down, everything changes about him. Even the person that you're looking at, he's no longer the big jolly guy with the big bushy beard. He's the big guy who could probably beat 10 bells of shit out of you.
Yeah. Well, the man who literally punched a polar bear. Yeah. Yeah, and it's well, I mean, you kind of came up with another slider is the length of your words, because that and we're nowhere near accents when we talk about this, which a lot of people consider to be the hurdle to making up make believe voices.
And that's my go-to. My go-to is accents. I almost
Precisely.
never change the pace, the rhythm of my voice. I go for an accent and I stick with it.
I mean, I
So
would.
I hop between nationalities is what I basically do.
I would heartily recommend this video from Improve Your Voice. If nothing else, it just knowing what you can change to change your voice helps no end. We've kind of looked at how to present your NPC, so their physical appearance, their vocal appearance. The next thing to make your NPCs more than just kind of cardboard cutout stat blocks is, I would argue, motive. Now, much in the same way that you have one unique thing to differentiate this NPC from the others, you don't have to go into long sprawling backstories for your NPCs. A lot of the time, you only just need one, maybe two, depending on the importance of this NPC within your story. And they don't have to be complicated motives either. Just saying, for example, wants to help everyone. That's a more than a good enough motive. The chances are we've all created player characters, and we may or may not have glossed over the 4 boxes in the top right: personality traits, ideals, flaws, and bonds.
Usually blank.
Yeah,
But
blank personality, blank ideals.
For example, I mean, there's nothing stopping you taking little statements like those which are normally reserved for player characters, quote unquote, and applying those to your NPCs. And that's a good way of informing yourself of how this NPC will react in any given moment. If you have an NPC that is naturally altruistic, then perhaps they will agree to let you use their blacksmith shop to repair your weapons and armor. What makes them interesting is when you give them motives that are private.
Right.
So I tend to find that these private motives are better for the NPCs that I know are going to have more oomph. It's one thing to have a big bad and the big bad's lieutenant. It's another thing if that lieutenant then has their own personal goals and motivations, maybe to overthrow the big bad. And if one way or the other the PCs manage to find that out, then there's different alternative routes to toppling said big bad.
Yeah.
And that all
Motive
comes from
likes
motive.
money.
Yeah, precisely. And that motive isn't going to be in the stat block per se. But yeah, just kind of having that in mind. A good way of kind of keeping this all tracked is through the little kind of teeny tiny index cards that you can pick up at various stationery shops. I think it was a Sly Flourish article that suggested that you should have these NPC cards to hand, so you can just kind of glance at them when the NPC comes up, and then you kind of give yourself a quick refresher. And the reason you use those small index cards is that you shouldn't ever have more information than can fit on the card. I mean, and if you do get to a point where actually the card is now full, you've got a question like, is this NPC just a background NPC anymore? Or is that character much more to the party? Does it need to evolve into something more fully fledged? Like, informing yourself on how an NPC will act, that will bring them to life. And I think every DM will agree with me, maybe potentially with an eye roll, but there are going to be NPCs that your players take a shining to. And you may or may not understand why they're taking a shining to them, but it's happened. And the players will decide that this NPC needs to have a much more important role in the party. In fact, Anton and I, we played Dragon Heist once upon a time, and it felt like we recruited every baddie to work in our tavern.
But they fit so perfectly. We needed a cook, a waiter. We filled in all the roles with the NPC baddies.
I mean,
with the NPC baddies that we spared, yeah.
I mean, you also did that in one of my campaigns. Like a lot of you, you guys hired a mercenary called Strong, and by the end of it, he actually became a full-fledged PC because you guys loved him so much. He was the rudest, unfriendliest person ever. He was like a paladin of Bane, a cleric of Bane.
All he needed was love.
And but they loved him, and then in the end, it was Dan took him on as a character.
Oh wow, nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's something that as a DM you probably aren't planning for, but if it's something that absolutely resonates with your players, then sure, just yes and it. See kind of where it takes you. You might find that this NPC becomes the basis of some real kind of big emotional roleplay down the road. Case in point, look at a lot of the memed NPCs from Critical Role, for example. Pumat Sol has become a fan favorite, and I don't know, maybe I'm being naive, but I don't feel like Pumat, this enchanter shopkeeper, was supposed to be as popular. Gilmore, actually, I'm realizing that there's a lot of shopkeepers that group seem to latch onto.
Yeah, it is shopkeepers, because
self-interest.
It's people sometimes you go back to often, like a shopkeeper, and if you've given them that personality, they're going to want to go back to it. Like Pumat Sol and Gilmore, it was the other one from
Gilmore.
You know, they have a personality that the players latched onto and enjoyed going back to and experiencing, much to I imagine Matt's chagrin.
Can somebody explain to me why in our campaign the party keeps going back to Jik? I don't get it, but maybe somebody else does.
Okay, Jik was partially my fault. Like, Jik was a goblin that Katja decided to take it was wounded, so she gave it some food, used the psychic powers to heal it. And obviously we all fell in love with Jik, and Jik is a recurring character. We love Jik. We want nothing bad to happen to Jik. And if anything bad happens to Jik, we will hunt down and kill him.
If your players are in a position where they really want to kind of drag an NPC along, then like as a DM, the books allow you, kind of give you guidelines for that. Specifically, I believe it's in Xanathar's that expands on the idea of kind of like hirelings, where an NPC is effectively leveled up to match the party and then becomes, a fully fledged member of the party, if you will, that's taking, you take into consideration their presence for things like combat building and so on and so forth.
I will add a anecdote, not anecdote, I think to that. Do make sure the whole party's on board with this character coming along, because like me, you may not be so enthused by this character. You might have most of them, but then one person really dislikes them, and you kind of want everybody on board.
Well,
precisely.
Thankfully, I don't think we have to worry about that in EOE.
Yes.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Just wait.
The last thing I should say is that, as a DM, you're in control of these NPCs, and they are kind of lovable, and usually they're lovable, and the players will latch onto them. Whilst you shouldn't ever really put more focus on the NPCs than your players, sometimes kind of highlighting an NPC a little bit, they just become this fascinating artifact that the players all kind of gather around and place on a pedestal, and then by kind of developing these NPCs, not only do you kind of give this kind of banner that all the players will kind of rally around and kind of get excited about, but again, that you'll make your world feel more real, because this character is now beginning to feel more real, and it's that much more crushing when you inevitably kill them. So
yes.
So yeah, just to very briefly recap. In terms of NPCs, I find that once you've got your name sheet with all of their names on them, so you don't get caught with your pants down, all you need after that is one unique thing to help differentiate your NPC from the others. Give them a motive. Give them a public motive that's easy to see. Maybe if it's important or prudent, give them a private motive so you can kind of influence them in ways that the players aren't expecting. Voices aren't as intimidating as you think they are going to be. All you need to do is change how you talk. But it doesn't have to be exclusively differentiated by accents or dialects. And last but not least, celebrate your NPCs and allow your players to celebrate them with you. If your players don't get on with one of them, that's fine. You can just make up another. But if they love an NPC, then you've got a plot hook on your hands. And yeah, there's loads of other tips and tricks that you can find across from other DMs across the internet. So yeah, take this. If you add it to your game and kind of make it feel a bit more lively and entertaining, then you're doing good.
So hopefully you learned a lot about how to make your own NPCs pop on the table, and I'm sure at some point you will not understand why they've latched onto that one, but hopefully this prepares you for that. So upon that note, let's move on. Thanks for watching. Release segments like this from the Tavern Between Dimensions every Friday here on the Explorers of Elsewhere channel. Otherwise, if you want to listen to the episode in full, you can check us out on Spotify and Amazon Music.